Welcome to Land of the Bible. I'm your host, David Sussman, and today we're taking a deep dive into the creation and development of the State of Israel. When we think about the birth of the State of Israel, it's easy to focus on dramatic headlines, wars, diplomacy, immigration. But behind the big moments is a deeper story, the steady, determined effort to build a functioning, thriving nation from the ground up. In this episode, we explore the foundational institutions that helped make a modern Israel possible, not just politically, but practically. Some of the foundational institutions include the Jewish National Fund, which began acquiring land for Jewish settlement long before the state was declared. Through tree planting, land reclamation, and infrastructure development, the JNF helped turn barren hills and swamplands into farmland and forest, laying the groundwork for generations to come. Transportation would be important as well. EGID, the National Bus Cooperative, connected isolated communities and gave people mobility long before private cars were common. The Israel Railways extended that connection, linking ports, cities, and rural areas into a unified network. And of course, El Al Airlines, Israel's national carrier, helped shape the nation's global identity, from rescue flights to regular commercial routes. But it wasn't only about infrastructure, it was also about industry. Israel's first factories didn't produce high tech. They made bricks, shoes, uniforms, canned goods, and soap. Together, these institutions and industries form the spine of a new country, connecting people, powering the economy, and reflecting a culture built on hard work, innovation, and shared purpose. Today, Israel is a leader in science, defense, and technology, but it all began with buses, water pipes, olive presses, and assembly lines. Join us as we journey through the humble beginnings and heroic efforts that built the modern state of Israel from the ground up.
We often talk about biblical stories and ancient stones, but today we're telling a different kind of holy story. This is the story of modern Israel and everything that you see all around you. In 1901, the JNF was founded with one simple revolutionary tool, the JNF Blue Box. Now, the Jewish National Fund was founded around the same time as the World Zionist Organization with Theodor Herzl. But this wasn't just any box. Now, if you're from my generation or anyone older than me, you know exactly what these boxes represented. Every single one of us around the world had one in our home. Every single coin that we put in there was another coin to buy another inch in the Holy Land. This was a covenant with the diaspora Jewry, and it's with this money the land was being redeemed, and it's with this money the land was being built. This was the collective will of a scattered nation made physical. The biblical connection of ancient times is not lost in the modern era. the early pioneers that came to Israel to rebuild the country were following in the footsteps of ancient prophets like Isaiah, where we read in verse 35 how the Jews will return to the land and the desert will bloom like roses. These early pioneers built the foundations to enable fulfilling the prophecies to become part of everyday life in the modern state. One of the major turning points for the JNF was draining the Chula Valley. This beautiful but dangerous swampland was reclaimed, and the act of draining this particular area was one of redemption. Draining the swamp saved the land from disease, and by doing so they made this land fertile and habitable for the returning exiles. This was the first step in making the land of milk and honey a reality. One of the major problems that early Zionists were met with when they came back to the Holy Land was facing a land that had been neglected for centuries. When Mark Twain, the famous author, visited the Holy Land, he was so surprised by what he saw that he even described the place as a desolate country. Malaria-infested swamps, eroded hillsides, this really was a true wilderness. We even can follow the prophecies of Ezekiel. In chapter 36, we read that the desolate land shall be tilled, and they will say that this land that has become desolate will become like the Garden of Eden. Israel was the only country in the entire world that finished the 20th century with a net gain of trees compared to anybody else. Over 240 million trees have been planted in Israel over the last century plus. It changed the actual climate and landscape of the entire country. The living result of over 125 years of JNF actions can be clearly seen today all throughout the land, from the desert to the north, and even from space. The JNF didn't just build reservoirs and forests and campsites and nature reserves. The JNF built and continues to build living monuments to resilience, and they planted the very possibility of a modern state.
Imagine walking where Jesus walked, where faith comes to life. Feel the Bible story unfold around you, from the green Galilee to Jerusalem's ancient streets. Experience the serene and welcoming land of the Bible, where miracles happen. Put your heart where His footsteps are. Visit Israel.
Welcome to the Eged Museum here in Cholon. We came here to look at the history of Eged and all the different buses that the country has used over the decades. Here at the Eged Museum, you can really get an excellent look at all the different buses that the country has used from the 40s all the way up to the modern period. In 1933, a group of bus drivers pooled their resources together to create the cooperative called Eged. See, in Hebrew, the name Eged comes from Igud, which literally means cooperative. And this is what they did to start the grassroots building of Israel's first national bus carrier. Some of the most important passengers especially in the very beginning of Eged's travels, were Olim, new immigrants. Hundreds of thousands of people coming from all corners of the earth, back to Israel, back to their homeland, arriving in ports, land borders, cars, boats, planes. And who was there to transport them to the kibbutzim, the moshavim, and the cities? Eged. Here in this museum, we can even see some of those first buses that took pilgrims and tourists, and most importantly, new immigrants, right from where they landed to their new homes in the Holy Land. For decades, Eged was the pulse of society, bringing people from remote towns and kibbutzim and moshavim all around the country, especially on intercity buses like these two that have been restored from the mid to the late 40s. And it's exactly buses like these ones that was such a great equalizer and unifier for people living in remote communities who slowly saw the gap and divide between the distance become shorter and shorter over the years. While we're here at the Eged Museum, it behooves me to share a few stories of a few individual buses that you see around us. The first one we're going to start with is this right behind me. It was made in 1973. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, 1973 was the year of the Yom Kippur War. These buses were converted into ambulances. And instead of carrying 30, 40, 50 people, they ended up being 22 people with over 20 beds right here inside the buses, with nurses and paramedics to attend to the wounded. Another really unique bus that I wanted to point out was this UK Leyland bus behind me. It was made in 1970, and it's the very first bus on the roads in Israel that had individual air conditioning. This changed everything. These buses ended up running for about 25 years. I wanted to point this out in a time gone by where the porter would be helping their passengers with the driver to get their luggage onto the luggage compartment on the roof, tie it down so they could get on their way as quickly as possible. Something you don't see anymore. The ethos that was embedded in Eged's legacy was one of connectivity. You see, Eged didn't just ask the question about how do we build the nation and connect the people. They answered it by saying, let's make sure that everyone can get to everyone else, even if they're located in the most remote locations within the country.
I've been a railway enthusiast since early childhood. I was quite hooked with railways, with the long winding tracks and the diverging routes. I remember when I was about 6 years old, we suddenly stood in front of what seemed to a little child as a very large locomotive, and I remember that being very influential on my perception of what trains are. My name is Chen Melling. I'm the head of the Israel Railway Museum, which is located in Haifa, in northern Israel. I've had the chance to volunteer at the Israel Railway Museum, where I now work, since the age of 12, for some 18 years. The history of railways in this country goes back to the late 19th century, the twilight years of the Ottoman Empire. The first railway line here, from Jaffa to Jerusalem, was actually initiated by a Jerusalemite Jew by the name of Yosef Navon. But this was a private enterprise. Most of the later lines built here were built either by governments or by armies, such as the Ottoman government for the Hijaz Railway with its branch to Haifa, or the British Army during the First World War, which laid down a line all the way from the Suez Canal to the same place in Haifa where we stand now. So this steam locomotive behind me, which is Hijaz Railway number 10, it is the only surviving steam engine in Israel, the only original surviving steam engine here. It's very nice. It has probably traveled around most of the Middle East, from Damascus in today's Syria to Medina in today's Saudi Arabia, and in this country from Akko to Gaza to Beersheba and further on to Jerusalem. It was built in 1902 in Germany for the Hijaz Railway, the government-owned Hijaz Railway. It was built to burn coal as its fuel. But during the First World War, the Turks had a problem getting coal because of the British control of the high seas. So they started burning wood for steam locomotives. The specific locomotive probably stopped working about 1948 because most of the narrow gauge Hijaz network stopped working there. Only some small remnants were operated for very few years after the establishment of the State of Israel. This infrastructure, during the Mandate period, allowed and supported the development of commerce, agriculture and industry, most of which were built up by the immigrating Jews of the time coming from Europe. This formed the basis for the State of Israel, which came to be in 1948, and allowed it to thrive and survive on its own. The railway lines built by the British Army during the First World War were not only used to carry soldiers to the front and the supplies and water and food and arms, but also to evacuate the wounded in cars such as this one. This is an ambulance car. These usually ran with multiple cars carrying hundreds and hundreds of patients on each run. This car, which was used as a staff car by both the Egyptian Railways and later Israel Railways, was restored as an ambulance car to tell this important story of the ambulance trains used in both world wars in this country and the Middle East. The railways themselves took a lot of damage during the Arab revolt of the late 1930s, during the Second World War, and then the struggle leading up to the actual establishment of the State of Israel. The government of the young country recognized the importance of that infrastructure and had most of it not only rebuilt but expanded, using both the work of many new immigrants coming after 1948, as well as money provided by Jewish support from around the world. This influenced a lot of the characteristics of the new lines, which were built with a lot of European instead of British influence, as most of them were now purchased from mainland Europe, especially Germany, which provided a lot of equipment as part of the reparations agreement. Part of it was used to purchase new equipment for Israel Railways, such as this shunting locomotive, a switcher, purchased in the mid-1950s. 18 of these allowed Israel Railways to operate the many new branch lines which it laid to serve industries around the country. But in the late 1950s, some of the support from the government waned away. For 30 years, most of the investment in developing the network went to the freight sector, allowing lines to be built in the Negev desert and developing the mining of phosphates, which were also exported through the new Ashdod port in the 1960s, as well as later in the 1970s also the extraction of potash from the Dead Sea, also used in the petrochemical industries and exported around the world. However, during the 1960s and 70s, investment in the passenger railway has dwindled. Since 1988, the turnaround year for Israel Railways, the government has invested many billions of shekels in building new lines, adding new passenger stations, expanding the fleet of trains with brand new trains from the best manufacturers, and generally supporting the operations of Israel Railways, enabling to become a very important part of the transportation scene in Israel. In fact, a great number of people rely daily on using the train to get to their workplaces, to get to their families, to go on vacations. The renewed government investment in Israel Railways since 1988 has allowed it to replace its entire passenger fleet twice since then. One of the most perhaps impressive projects for new line construction in recent decades, or perhaps ever in Israel, was the new line constructed to Jerusalem. This was meant to augment and even replace the old line, which was the first line built in this country. It was unique not only for having most of the line in tunnels, but having an underground station in the center of Jerusalem. Actually one of the deepest railway stations in the world, with track level at some 80 meters below ground. It is a very large station which is now being expanded again. This new line, extending from the existing Navon station in Jerusalem, would have 2 new stations underground in Jerusalem, allowing more people to have access to the railway, as well as allowing the railway itself to run a much more frequent service. This would hopefully help ease congestion on the road and help the economy develop in the way that it should be throughout the nation. The long-term future of railways in this country contains many possibilities for expansion both within the country and to surrounding nations, as well as now starting the construction of the first high-speed railway line in this country. The new high-speed line would allow the running of trains at up to 250 kilometers an hour. This would both add to capacity as well as enable faster journeys being made, also free up capacity for freight trains to connect the north and southern parts of the country.
I will bless those who bless you, God promised Abraham. Embrace this covenant by connecting with the people of Israel. From Jerusalem's stones to Galilee's shores, experience living faith through their traditions and hospitality. Your journey is more than visiting biblical sites. It's about hearts that welcome your friendship. Your presence matters. Discover Israel.
El Al, Israel's national airline, has been used for the ingathering of exiles for decades. The name itself, El Al, comes from the scriptures in verse 17 of Hosea, where it talks about upwards and towards the skies or towards the heavens. And this is what the airline was officially named. It started in crisis back in 1948 during the War of Independence, and it soon became the global connection for Israelis, pilgrims, and tourists throughout the world. From a very modest and humble beginning, borrowing just 2 airplanes from the military, a DC-4 and a C-46, El Al's first inaugural flight was in September 1948, when it brought Chaim Weizmann from Geneva to be Israel's first president. El Al purchased its first 2 commercial aircraft from American Airlines in the late 40s. These were to become the very first passenger flights out of Israel. What's really cool is that these first commercial pilots originally came to Israel to help in the fight for the War of Independence. They came from America, from England, from South Africa, and other countries, because Israel didn't have any pilots at the War of Independence. And these were the guys that eventually became the first commercial pilots. One of the lesser spoken about stories is the expulsion of the Jews from Middle Eastern and North African communities after the establishment of the State of Israel. You see, we're talking almost 1 million Jews from places like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen, Ethiopia, Iraq, Syria. Jews had been living here for centuries, many of them going way back to even before the Spanish Inquisition in 1492. Now it's in this global environment that Israel and El Al, the national airline, performed one of the most amazing feats ever in the nascent state of Israel. From June 1948 until September 1949, El Al transported almost 50,000 Yemenites back to Israel on their planes, literally fulfilling the prophecy that they shall return on the wings of eagles. And El Al was a significant and major part of helping them get back to the Holy Land. What started as a lifeline soon became a bridge for the world to connect to the startup nation. El Al continues to bring Jews from the diaspora, pilgrims and tourists to the Holy Land. It has become a symbol of modern marvel that today you can get a direct flight to Tel Aviv from most places around the world. El Al's contribution to the successful rebuilding of the modern state's infrastructure is yet another sign of the biblical prophecies being fulfilled and returning the Jews from exile. G'day, I'm Paul. In this episode, we're going to be exploring and discovering brand new activities that you and your family can participate in at the National Parks Authority in various sites in the northern part of Israel, in the Galil and the Golan.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to join us next time as we connect you to the people, places, and lands of the Bible.